The 1960s weren't just about peace and pop culture. Beneath the surface, exploitation cinema was pushing boundaries so extreme that governments around the world stepped in. These films showed brutal violence, sexual cruelty, and taboo themes mainstream studios refused to touch. Censors responded with bans, seizures, and destroyed prints. Critics called them obscene and dangerous. Yet their impact couldn't be erased. These movies reshaped underground cinema and redefined how far film could go. This list explores 10 of the most brutal 1960s exploitation films that crossed every line and paid the price. Mantis in Lace, 1968. Mantis in Lace emerged during a period of intense cultural anxiety surrounding drugs, youth culture, and social collapse. The film follows a troubled young woman whose violent impulses surface while she is under the influence of LSD, leading her to murder men she encounters in Los Angeles nightlife. Released at the height of anti-drug hysteria, the movie deliberately fused psychedelic imagery with graphic violence, creating an experience authorities considered dangerous. Bright colors, distorted visuals, and strobe lighting were used to simulate hallucinations, which censors feared glamorized drug use while linking it directly to homicidal behavior. Several countries banned the film outright, while others demanded heavy cuts. Critics accused it of exploiting public fear rather than offering meaningful commentary. What made the film especially controversial was its suggestion that experimentation with drugs inevitably resulted in madness and murder. This narrative reinforced worst-case stereotypes that dominated political discourse at the time. Despite its crude execution, Mantis in Lace functions as a revealing artifact of 1960s panic culture. Today, it is studied less for artistic merit, and more for what it reveals about how exploitation cinema fed on social paranoia. The film remains a controversial reminder of how fear was converted into shock entertainment. White Slaves of Chinatown, 1964. White Slaves of Chinatown stands as one of the most notorious examples of racial exploitation in 1960s cinema. Marketed as a warning drama, the film claims to expose secret prostitution rings operating in San Francisco's Chinatown, yet it relies almost entirely on sensationalism and harmful stereotypes. Asian characters are depicted as predatory villains, while white women are portrayed as helpless victims, reinforcing xenophobic fears rather than presenting documented reality. Civil rights groups and Asian American organizations quickly condemned the movie, arguing it encouraged hatred and misinformation. In several cities with large Asian populations, protests pressured theaters to cancel screenings, resulting in effective bans even where censorship boards allowed exhibition. Authorities were particularly concerned that the film blurred social awareness with lurid thrills, using trafficking as an excuse for sexualized violence. The production offered no meaningful context or solutions, only panic-driven imagery. Over time, the film became less a piece of entertainment and more a cautionary artifact. Today, White Slaves of Chinatown is studied for its historical significance, illustrating how exploitation films could weaponize racial anxiety for profit. Its legacy remains troubling, serving as a reminder of cinema's power to inflame prejudice when responsibility is abandoned by filmmakers chasing controversy. The Sadist, 1963. The Sadist is a stark minimalist thriller that disturbed audiences through realism rather than spectacle. Inspired loosely by real Midwestern murder cases, the film traps three ordinary adults in a roadside nightmare controlled by a young sociopath and his equally detached companion. Unlike traditional crime films, the killer is given no tragic explanation, political motive, or redemptive arc. His cruelty exists purely for personal amusement, which deeply unsettled censors and critics. The low-budget production style enhances this discomfort using natural locations, flat lighting, and unembellished performances that make the violence feel uncomfortably plausible. Authorities in several American states restricted or banned the film, especially in regions close to similar real crimes. What alarmed regulators most was the absence of moral balance. Violence occurs suddenly, justice is delayed, and emotional closure is deliberately denied. Viewers are left with unease rather than reassurance. For years, the film circulated quietly, screened infrequently, and discussed cautiously. Modern reassessment has recognized the sadist as an early example of psychological realism in American genre cinema. Today, the film remains unsettling because it strips violence of comfort and meaning. Its legacy endures as a bleak warning about cruelty existing without motive, explanation, or cinematic protection whatsoever. Career Bed, 1969. Career Bed emerged at the end of the 1960s as one of the most uncomfortable exploitation films aimed directly at Hollywood itself. The story follows young women seeking acting careers who quickly discover that professional advancement depends on sexual submission to powerful men. Rather than sensationalizing fantasy situations, the film presents exploitation as routine business practice, which immediately alarmed industry figures. Several cities, including Los Angeles, banned the film, fearing reputational damage and legal fallout. What made Career Bed especially controversial was how recognizable its scenarios felt. Audiences understood that the abuses depicted were not imaginary, but whispered realities within the entertainment industry. Conservative groups attacked the film for obscenity, while feminist organizations criticized it for reenacting exploitation under the guise of exposure. Despite these objections, the movie refused to soften its message. Sexual coercion is shown as systemic, not the act of a single villain. The tone is cynical, almost documentary, stripping away glamour and romance. As a result, Career Bed struggled to find distribution and quickly disappeared from mainstream theaters. Today, the film is viewed less as entertainment and more as a disturbing historical document. It remains a bleak warning about unchecked power, ambition, silence, and institutional complicity. Olga's House of Shame, 1964. Part of the infamous Olga series, Olga's House of Shame became one of the most aggressively censored exploitation films of the 1960s. The film portrays a brutal underworld where women are abducted, imprisoned, and forced into prostitution under constant threat of violence. Presented in a cold, pseudo-documentary style, the movie depicts abuse as routine rather than exceptional, which deeply alarmed censorship boards. Authorities argued that the film offered no moral framework, no justice, and no emotional relief, only relentless cruelty. Several American states banned the film outright, while theater owners in other regions were arrested for screening it. Many prints were seized and destroyed, making the movie difficult to view for decades. Critics from across political and cultural backgrounds condemned its objectification of women and nihilistic worldview. Unlike other exploitation films, Olga's House of Shame refused to soften its message. Suffering is continuous, and power is absolute. Today, the film is discussed primarily in academic contexts as an extreme example of roughy cinema. Its value lies in demonstrating how far exploitation filmmaking pushed boundaries before censorship laws hardened. It remains controversial, disturbing, historically significant, and frequently cited when examining censorship, ethics, and exploitation cinema history worldwide today, globally. The Girl Who Knew Too Much, 1963. The Girl Who Knew Too Much is widely regarded as the foundation of the giallo genre, but its importance also brought serious censorship trouble. The film follows a young woman who witnesses a murder while visiting Rome and becomes entangled in a mystery filled with paranoia, suspicion, and violence. Director Mario Bava combined crime, erotic tension, and stylized murder in a way that felt dangerously seductive to censors. Unlike traditional thrillers, the camera lingers, transforming acts of violence into visually striking moments rather than quick shocks. Authorities in several countries feared this aesthetic approach made murder appear glamorous. As a result, the film faced bans and heavy edits, particularly in Spain and the United Kingdom. What unsettled regulators most was the voyeuristic tone, especially in scenes involving female victims. The movie blurred lines between fear and desire, creating a psychological unease that went beyond gore. While initially controversial, the film's influence later became undeniable. It inspired decades of Italian thrillers and American slashers. Today, The Girl Who Knew Too Much is celebrated for its innovation and atmosphere. What once alarmed censors is now recognized as genre-defining artistry that permanently reshaped cinematic suspense forever. She Freak, 1967. She Freak shocked audiences not only through violence, but through its cruel exploitation of real carnival performers. The film tells the story of a waitress who marries into a traveling sideshow for money, only to face a grotesque fate after betraying those around her. Much of the movie features actual carnival workers, filmed without sensitivity and presented as objects of fear rather than people. This approach triggered protests from disability advocates and censorship boards alike. British authorities refused classification outright, citing offensive treatment of disability, while American drive-in theaters pulled the film after public backlash. What disturbed censors most was the film's mean-spirited tone. Unlike traditional horror, it offers no fantasy distance or moral lesson. The transformation sequence is presented with deliberate cruelty, designed to shock rather than frighten. The low-budget production amplifies the discomfort, making scenes feel unfiltered and invasive. Over time, She Freak gained cult notoriety, though rarely praise. Today, it is discussed primarily as an ethical failure rather than an artistic one. Its historical importance lies in showing how exploitation cinema crossed from provocation into outright dehumanization. She Freak remains controversial because it documents a moment when shock value outweighed empathy entirely for audiences worldwide. The Touchables, 1968. The Touchables is a British youth drama released during a period of intense anxiety about teenage rebellion and celebrity culture. The story follows a group of young women who impulsively kidnap a popular pop singer, treating the crime as playful adventure rather than a serious offense. Authorities feared this premise would encourage copycat behavior, especially as real kidnappings dominated headlines at the time. Although the film contains relatively little explicit violence, its casual attitude toward coercion and power deeply unsettled censors. The girls' actions are framed as rebellious fantasy, blurring moral boundaries instead of reinforcing consequences. Several regions restricted or delayed release, citing concerns about youth influence. What made The Touchables particularly controversial was its accessibility. Unlike underground exploitation films, it targeted mainstream teenage audiences through pop music, fashion, and colorful psychedelic style. Regulators worried that its glamorous presentation of lawbreaking made crime appear exciting and consequence-free. Over time, the film faded into obscurity, overshadowed by louder exploitation titles. Today, it is revisited as a reflection of generational fear rather than genuine depravity. The Touchables illustrates how censorship often reacted not to graphic content, but to perceived cultural influence. Its legacy lies in showing how mild rebellion provoked censorship. Blood Feast, 1963. Blood Feast occupies a unique and infamous place in cinema history as the film that effectively created the splatter genre. Directed by Herschel Gordon Lewis, it deliberately rejected suggestion and subtlety in favor of showing everything on screen. The story follows an Egyptian caterer who murders young women to recreate an ancient ritual feast for the goddess Ishtar. What truly shocked audiences was not the plot, but the graphic presentation. Scenes of dismemberment, exposed organs, and mutilation were shown in vivid color, something mainstream films had never attempted before. Censorship boards reacted immediately. Several countries banned the film outright, while numerous American cities refused to screen it. British authorities denied classification for decades. Officials feared its explicit violence could inspire imitation and erode moral boundaries. Critics dismissed the film as crude and tasteless, citing its amateur acting and minimal production values. Yet Blood Feast proved that shock itself could draw audiences. Its financial success opened the door for increasingly graphic horror films. Today, the movie is studied not for quality, but for impact. Blood Feast permanently changed what filmmakers believed they could show on screen. Its legacy remains controversial, but its influence on horror cinema is undeniable. Aroused, 1966. Aroused was presented as an educational documentary, but its true purpose was clearly exploitation, which immediately attracted censorship attention. The film follows a detective investigating prostitution, using interviews and staged scenes to claim it is exposing hidden social realities. In practice, the movie relies heavily on voyeuristic imagery and sensationalized violence, blurring the line between information and titillation. Censors objected strongly to its misleading format, arguing that labeling explicit material as educational was more dangerous than honest sexploitation. Several American states banned the film outright, while others pursued obscenity prosecutions against distributors and theater owners. What made Aroused especially controversial was its treatment of women. Sex workers are depicted almost exclusively as degraded victims or moral warnings, reinforcing harmful stereotypes rather than offering insight. The film's pseudo-documentary style gave audiences the false impression they were watching reality, raising ethical concerns about manipulation. Feminist groups protested its portrayal of female bodies as objects for judgment and spectacle. Over time, Aroused became a key example cited in debates about censorship and exploitation disguised as social concern. Today, it is studied mainly as a historical artifact, illustrating how exploitation filmmakers used false authority to bypass restrictions. Its legacy remains troubling, highlighting the dangers of exploiting real issues for shock value alone. These films may be banned, censored, or nearly erased, but their impact on cinema history is undeniable. They exposed the raw edge of filmmaking when there were no rules, only shock and rebellion. If this deep dive into forbidden 60s exploitation surprised you, let us know which title disturbed you the most in the comments. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more untold stories from cinema's darkest corners. Over time, Aroused became a key example cited in debates about censorship and exploitation disguised as social concern. Today, it is studied mainly as a historical artifact, illustrating how exploitation filmmakers used false authority to bypass restrictions. Its legacy remains troubling, highlighting the dangers of exploiting real issues for shock value alone. These films may be banned, censored, or nearly erased, but their impact on cinema history is undeniable. They exposed the raw edge of filmmaking when there were no rules, only shock and rebellion. If this deep dive into forbidden 60s exploitation surprised you, let us know which title disturbed you the most in the comments. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more untold stories from cinema's darkest corners. More banned films, lost classics, and controversial history are coming next.